Welcome back to The Heat. We're talking about RIMPAC, the world's largest multinational maritime military exercise, now taking place in Hawaii. Joining me to discuss it from Beijing is Teng Jianqun. He's the director of the Center of Arms Control for the China Institute of International Studies. And from Brussels, we're joined by Roland Freudenstein. He's the deputy director of Wildfried Martens Center for European Studies. Welcome to the show, gentlemen. Mr. Teng, let me begin with you. What is China's perspective on these exercises? Does China feel it's important to be taking part in them?
Of course, from the Chinese perspective, I think for all the Chinese think this is a very important, event for the PRA Navy. It's not only a training for the Navy, but also a very important occasion to have, chance to exchange ideas, to have a good understanding. And the most important for the, participation is the military transparency. As we have witnessed in recent days, a lot of, local people paid visit to our vessels. So this is very important for the PRA Navy to show their, capability, to show the intention and have a good understanding with their counterparts in the exercise.
Roland, do you think it was a good idea to include China for the first time?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, this goes back to a proposal of then Defense Secretary Panetta in 2012, and now China is taking part for the first time. So I think it's a good thing for three reasons. It's a confidence-building measure, as the military folks call it. It is good for communication. It's also an opportunity to increase transparency, to know more about each other, and there we might still have to work on an equal measure of transparency. And third, I think it's a great way to for other countries to encourage China to actually play a more constructive role in international relations.
I think China would probably agree it is playing a constructive role. Mr. Teng, would you like to respond to that? Do you believe China is playing a constructive role?
Yeah, I think with the fast development of its economy and its military modernization, I'm sure the whole world, has an anticipation for China to provide more, public products for the international community. And as we have witnessed in recent years, our task force, have been played a very important role in the escort of the, commercial ships in Aden Bay, and also Chinese, Navy participate in the escort for the chemical, vessels, from Syria to Italy. I think this is actually a very important role played by the Chinese Navy to show their capability and also to show the intention to be more constructive in maintaining the peace and the stability in the world.
Mr. Teng, I spoke earlier to retired United States Navy Admiral Dennis Blair, and he said it's very positive that China is taking part in these exercises. He even suggests that China could host one of these RIMPAC drills in the years to come. Will China do that? Do you think that's a good idea?
Yeah, I'm sure China is willing to play such a role in leading, the RIMPAC exercise. But I think this is actually a game led by the United States and Japan this time, as a very important partner, in Asia Pacific region. China and the United States, I think enjoy the very stable relationship in recent years, though there's some, political and economic, ups and downs. But I think under the new leadership of China, the Chinese military, has been very active and very, positive in cooperation with all the parties in this region. This is the new attitude by the PRA. And if we talk about the military exchanges with the United States, we can see this time, the Army, the Navy, and even the Air Force. I think all the services of PRA actually are very active in this, game with the United States.
Let me go to you, Roland. Roland, it's not just the United States and China that are taking part. 20 other countries are taking part. What can China learn from these countries, and what can all these countries learn from China?
Well, you know, I think China could talk to the navies and the leaders of its smaller neighbors, such as the Philippines, Vietnam, Myanmar, but also Japan, of course, and use this opportunity to get to know why these countries are worried about what China is actually doing with its navy. And I certainly don't completely agree with the view that China is only doing constructive things with its naval forces at the moment. You know, we have an active questioning of the territorial status quo in many countries, in many territories of the South China Sea. So, you know, I think to increase the communication between China and its small neighboring countries, which are worried, would be a fantastic result. Now, what the other countries could learn from China would be, for example, to get a bit more information and transparency about the armaments program of not only the Chinese Navy, but the Chinese armed forces in general, and the exact way the defense budget which has vastly increased, massively increased over the last 10 years, how exactly it is spent and for what.
Well, let's give Mr. Teng an opportunity to respond to that. Mr. Teng, Roland is saying that there are reasons other countries in the region are worried about China. Go ahead and respond.
Yeah, I think there has been anxiety, not only worry about the future, about the development of China in recent years. So that's why, you know, in some areas, for example, in South China Sea, Eastern China Sea, there has been some, you know, standoff between countries and China. I think this is actually a real challenge for the Chinese top leaders. How can we, you know, explain to its neighbors on the intention and on the purpose to have such a, you know, fast development in its defense? I think as for our neighboring countries, all the participants in this drill, I think of course, there has been a lot of mysterious and curiosities about China's navy, and so this time, I think, after their visits, you know, to the vessels in Hawaii, they could have a very good understanding on the capability, on the, you know, intention of our, you know, fighting ships. For example, our destroyer, our frigate, and the logistic supporting vessels. So I think the participation, as we discussed just now, is very important for China to give very clear-cut, you know, signal to the outside world that China, you know, of course, has the capability to defend its territory and also the sovereignty, but also China is very interested in the cooperation, you know, in dealing with challenges, you know, in traditional areas.
Roland, some European nations are also represented here: France, United Kingdom, Netherlands. Why are they taking part in Pacific Rim exercises?
Well, first of all, you know, European nations are still interested in what's happening around the globe, you know, even though sometimes in the crisis of the past years it has seemed that we're only focusing upon our own things, but we're not. Where we really are, we do care what happens elsewhere. And let me just give you one example where Europe could and should come in, actually, in these differences over territory, over sea territory in the East China Sea and the South China Sea. You know, a country like the Philippines has actually appealed for European arbitration, for mediation between China and the Philippines on the questions of you know, oil rigs and disputed territory and all that. So, you know, I think that is an opportunity that where the Europeans could come in supporting international norms and actually mediating between different partners, because Europeans maybe more than other countries still have the trust of all parties concerned.
Mr. Teng, would China be okay with European mediation?
No, I don't think so. You know, it's our long, you know, standing position that we prefer. I mean, China prefers to, you know, solve the dispute with its neighboring countries, especially with the Philippines, with Vietnam, with Malaysia, and other claimants, you know, in South China Sea in a bilateral way, not a multilateral way. So we, you know, do not like the involvement, not only the European countries, but also the United States. But this time, actually, the United States, you know, has already stood with the the countries like the Philippines, Vietnam, and actually stand opposite to the Chinese government. I think this is the issue, or the differences between our attitudes toward the solution of the dispute in South China Sea or even in Eastern China Sea.
Let's get back to the RIMPAC exercises that are underway. It's not just about military drills and maritime exercises. It's also about building relationships. Roland, let me begin with you.
Yeah, and it's also about humanitarian contingencies. And, China has sent a huge hospital ship, one of the 4 ships that it sent. So this is about questions that concern all countries, coping with victims of natural disasters and so on and so on. So on the practical side, I think there is something that aside from the military factor interests everyone. But yes, I mean, there is a general interest in cooperating and getting to know each other and actually talking on different levels of the military hierarchy, talking between the navies of different countries. I think that's a value in itself. And it's to come back to my very first point, I think it's confidence building.
Mr. Teng, you've got the last word.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think this is actually exercise originally designed to wage a war or maritime warfare with the former Soviet Union in the high sea, in the early years, especially in 1970s and 80s. But nowadays, I think the main focus have already been shifted to the operation other than war, the non-traditional challenges. For example, anti-piracy, disaster relief, and other operations in non-traditional areas. So I think this transition from the maritime warfares from the operations other than war is a very important signal, just to show the changes of our international security. Yeah.
Thank you so much, sir. Teng Jianqun, Roland Freudenstein. Very interesting discussion. Thank you to you both.